you're watching The Buck Stops Here and I'm Barkha Dutt. On the program this evening, the top story, Pakistan provokes and India this time is saying, we will make you pay. The defense minister saying there will be an unaffordable cost for Pakistan, describing Pakistan's tensions at the border, its provocations as adventurism. On the show tonight, we'll be looking at whether the Narendra Modi government has changed the rules of the game when it comes to Pakistan. That'll be a big focus on the program tonight. Also coming up later on the program at about 9:30, a young first-time MLA finds herself catapulted to the national headlines with speculation that she could even be the next Chief Minister of Maharashtra. Gopinath Munde's daughter Pankaja Munde speaks to me later on the program. There was a clamour in the crowds for you to be, in a sense, named the chief ministerial candidate or to be the chief minister of the BJP.
See, if it was happening in normal scenario, I would have felt very happy and very content, very proud of it maybe. But now I'm really not thinking on those lines. They look at me as substitute of my dad. They look at me as, okay, if Munde Saab is not there, she will be the one who will lead us. She'll be the one who will take care of us.
But first, our top story, the tension at the border, the provocation from Pakistan and India's tough response with unprecedented retaliation. The defense minister and the prime minister both reacting today. The prime minister also going on record to say this was not the time for politicians to bicker. It was not the time for politicians to even talk. It was the time to let the soldiers and their guns do the talking. Now, the defense minister has warned Pakistan of an unaffordable cost if Pakistan continues with what Arun Jaitley called Pakistan's misadventure. Can both countries still pull back from the brink? Joining me first on the program today is Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Omar Abdullah. Omar, let me start by asking you, as somebody who has obviously in the capacity of Chief Minister and politician from the state seen this several times before. Is what's happened in the last 9 to 10 days different in magnitude, intensity, scale and impact?
Well, absolutely. In terms of the spread, the number of areas that are being targeted, the number of posts that are being targeted, the fact that civilian populations are deliberately being brought into the firing range, and that to large towns, not just small villages. Earlier we've seen ceasefire violations where we've had casualties. It's been the result of a stray shot that might have hit a house somewhere in an unpopulated or sort of thinly populated area. But to have shells dropping in the heart of Arnia town, in the bus yard, and into houses surrounding that clearly indicates that there were no effort made to spare the civilian population. In fact, if anything, there seems to have been a concerted effort to actually target the civilian populations.
So to that extent, is it reminiscent of the kind of tension that those of us who've covered the state for a long time used to see before 2003 when the ceasefire kicked in?
Yeah, absolutely. We saw these sort of situations in the run-up to the ceasefire that was worked out by Prime Minister Vajpayee and his counterpart in Pakistan. After that, these things became a distant memory for most of us. But unfortunately, once again, in areas that had been peaceful until recently, now they have shelling. And I mean, let's take Arnia again. I mean, Arnia had 5 casualties on the day of Eid. That is an area that hadn't seen casualties even in the wars. I mean, when you talk to the people of Arnia, they will tell you that they hadn't seen casualties in 71 or in the 60s. And now in a situation where there is supposed to be a ceasefire in place, they had 5 casualties.
Let me ask you, Omar Abdullah, the Prime Minister today has said in more than one election rally that when there's tension at the border, it's not the time for politicians to be talking, that it shouldn't be their tongues that are wagging. The soldiers' guns and the soldiers' decisions should speak for themselves. Do you agree when Mr. Modi says that the ceasefire violations should not be the subject of political debate? He's, of course, responding to the criticism that he's come under, or his government has come under, from the Congress, the NCP and the Shiv Sena.
Look, I think it's convenient that suddenly ceasefire violations should not be the subject of political debate, and I entirely agree with the Prime Minister. That having been said, where was this thought process when the same ceasefire violations were taking place during Dr. Manmohan Singh's government? How come this thought process didn't exist then? And now suddenly when he is leading, that he recognizes this. Great. I'm all for the ceasefire violations being taken off the political table. But then I think it's something that the BJP needs to remember for those times when they're not in office.
Let me ask you though, when the government decided to suspend talks with Pakistan after the Pakistan High Commissioner met with Kashmiri separatists, you were among those who said that the door must be kept open for dialogue. Now, given what is happening today, given the provocation from Pakistan, do you back the Indian decision, the government's decision, that there can be no dialogue possible in this environment?
Well, I mean, my problem is if you don't talk to people when times are bad, then when do you talk to them? Look, I understand that Government of India felt the need to suspend the dialogue process. I still don't understand the reason for it. Even at that time I said that if the Government of India had suspended the dialogue process because of the ceasefire violations or because of the internal situation within Pakistan, that would have been understandable, or perhaps more understandable than suspending the dialogue process because the Hurriyat leaders went and had a cup of tea with the High Commissioner of Pakistan. I mean, that tea has happened for the last 20 years, and I dare say it will continue until you find a final solution to this problem of Jammu and Kashmir. So now that we've tied ourselves in that knot, okay, so that dialogue process is now closed for the time being. I'm now even more surprised when you see news reports suggesting that the security forces, the army in particular, and the BSF have been told no flag meetings until the shelling stops. Now, I don't understand. If we don't talk to each other at the operating level at a time like this, what's the point of a flag meeting once the ceasefire resumes and the violence ends? This is the time when we need to talk to each other, when we need to dial down tensions, and when we need to try and at least get this ceasefire back on track. Once these tensions end, and I have no doubt they will end, hopefully sooner rather than later, at that point having a flag meeting is pointless.
Okay, but briefly in the end, maybe the operational level contact that isn't taking place, as you said, is because the security forces this time are being given full freedom to respond in the manner that they think is appropriate. It's to give them operational freedom.
Look, Barkha, I mean, Government of India will choose how it wants to respond to this situation militarily, and that obviously is their right. But at the same time, I think it is important on the ground to keep channels of communication open, to try and figure out if there is some way to pull back from the brink. Even in the past, when we've had ceasefire violations and they've gone on for a few days, we have through the mechanism of flag meetings been able to dial down tensions at a time when incursions with China take place. I mean, if at the next point of a Chinese incursion, if we turn around and say there'll be no flag meeting until the Chinese withdraw, you think the Chinese are going to withdraw? The only way we manage to get the Chinese to withdraw is after a series of flag meetings, and therefore flag meetings become even more important at a time of tension. And I think that is one mechanism that needs to be kept open. A flag meeting is not tantamount to India and Pakistan talking to each other about all issues. It's not the comprehensive dialogue. It is purely a flag meeting for localized contact to deal with a localized situation, and that's what we're dealing with now. So by all means, if the Government of India thinks that this is not the opportune time to talk to Pakistan, I may or may not agree with that. That's a different issue. But I certainly disagree with the fact that at a time like this, we even put the flag meetings on hold.
Okay. Omar Abdullah, thank you so much for talking to us. Let's go straight now to our debate tonight. As Pakistan provokes, has the Narendra Modi government changed the rules of the game? Let's introduce our guest this evening. With me in the studio, G. Parthasarathi, former High Commissioner to Pakistan, senior diplomat. Also with me in the studio, General Syed Atta Hasnain, who has, of course, commanded the 15th Corps in the Kashmir Valley. From the Congress, we're joined by Abhishek Singhvi. From the BJP, we're joined by Chandan Mitra. And from Islamabad tonight, we have Marvi Memon. She's, of course, the leader of Nawaz Sharif's party, the PMLN. But before I get the politicians involved in this, I actually want to hear from the experts. And I'll start with you, Mr. Parthasarathi. You just heard Omar Abdullah saying that, look, the civilians have been deliberately targeted. It is different from the kind of ceasefire violations we've seen in the past. But it is not wise to not even have flag meetings. Our sources in the government confirming to our reporters that even flag meetings are a no-no till the guns go silent from the Pakistani side. Have we responded in a way that's changed the rules of the game?
First, let me say something on a broader perspective than this. I am frankly disappointed at the political controversies being raised now. I fought the 65 conflict in the Sialkot sector with the army. I was in 1971 in Moscow when we signed the Indo-Soviet Treaty as a diplomat. In all these cases, the BJP, the Jansangh then went totally along with the government, whether it was Lal Bahadur Shastri or Indira Gandhi. Similarly, when I was in Pakistan during Kargil, I was very pleased to see Mrs. Sonia Gandhi backing whatever Mr. Vajpayee was doing, no questions raised. And not even serious questions of failure of intelligence.
And this time it's become instead a political talking point in Maharashtra.
Yes. Now I'm coming to a couple of things, but as I see it. There was a ceasefire which we agreed to in 2003. Yeah. Before that, the firing was much worse than what it is now. This is chicken feed compared to what we did to the Neelam Valley in 2000 and 2001. Okay, so if we open out fully, it's a totally different ball game. The fact of the matter is that we should not, we should let these things be decided on the spot. Yes, defense ministers can make statements. They always do. Yeah. They're expected to keep their soldiers happy. But if you notice what has Mr. Modi said yesterday, he said he is hopeful of a settlement. The Prime Minister, like Mrs. Gandhi or Lal Bahadur Shastri or Vajpayee, has not used that sort of language about conflict. So, quite obviously, there will be channels open. External Affairs Minister has said nothing. Yeah. So, look, the Pakistanis have been testing out this government from day one. The attack on Herat of the day of swearing in was deliberate. The Afghans told us, the Americans told us. It was mounted from Pakistan. Then you have from August onwards ceasefire violations.
But so has our response been different? Do you sense a difference in our response?
Listen, I don't want to go into what our response was in the past. There have been occasions when it was robust. But I must say that the response this time has been robust. Now, as I see it, in Pakistan, we have a government headed by Nawaz Sharif, which has no control either on its western frontiers, which Afghanistan, where in Waziristan the army is running the show, or now on its eastern frontier. Okay, so the fact of the matter is that let us see how this plays out, because ultimately these things come to an end. But I would earnestly urge politics of all sides. Please, when the boys are on the field, I've been on the field, please. Don't drag controversies.
I think that is so important that this should not become the subject of political competition on the election trail. But before we put that to the politicians, General Hasnain, our response this time, a no to flag meetings. The Chief Minister arguing the flag meetings are the mechanism to solve this. But there could come a time when the security forces say, no, we don't want this overture right now. We don't want to extend the olive branch.
You see, Barkha, there's a question of response. Responses are always by notches. They keep going up. You keep ratcheting it up. It's not just a single dimensional response and you stop at that. There's a degree of flexibility in this, right? Now, earlier, when you had the head cutting incident, the beheading incident in Rajouri, etc., that time we continued to speak. And nothing really came out of it. As such, of course, it calmed down subsequently. But there was a tremendous response within the country, a negative response in the country against the army, against the government, everyone, for not having responded sufficiently at that time, perhaps. Right? I think this time, we are ratcheting it up a little more. There's no point talking on the ground. And if you know what a flag meeting is... Not even a flag meeting? If you know what a flag meeting is, I've attended many flag meetings. Flag meetings is a question of going with your map there and talking to each other and saying, you started it or I started it. Yeah. Right? It leads to nothing. Let this entire tension abate. It will abate, as Mr. Parthasarathi very correctly says, it will abate after some time. And then, possibly we can talk and bring in some more, mechanisms into it. We can have some sectorial...
But, one little point I wish to make. My understanding is this whole thing has been covered up in Pakistan. The government is too scared to tell the press what is happening. Absolutely. That 20 to 40,000 of them have been displaced. Look, Nawaz Sharif is not going to like this. And let's wait till tomorrow their Security Council meets. and what emerges from it.
In a way, it reminds me of Kargil, when the fact that hundreds of Pakistani soldiers had actually been killed. I mean, it was just blacked out. Now, before we put that to Marvi Memon, I just want to get Abhishek and Chandan in. Abhishek Singhvi, I'll start with you. I'll start with you because you heard G. Parthasarathy saying this is not the time for political point scoring. That's exactly what Narendra Modi has said in both of his rallies today, that it's shameful that netas should be picking on this to score electoral points in Maharashtra.
Well, I think there are no two views about the fact that when India deals as India elsewhere, whether on the battlefield or indeed at foreign major fora, we all stand united. And we have seen that time and again. Today and tomorrow, if we have any form of Indo-Pak conflict in the smallest and the lowest form, there is but no doubt that the entire country is one as far as the foreign power is concerned. But, and I certainly want to say, Varkha, that I will not indulge in any politicking and not do unto others as perhaps frequently the BJP has done by breaking down consensus on age-old foreign policy issues, and including other issues. But I don't think it behoves us to do that.
But
Equally,
Rahul Gandhi,
it cannot mean.
But Abhishek, you may not be doing it, but Rahul and Sharad Pawar both have. And so has the Shiv Sena.
No, 1 minute. No. Look, what is said at an election rally, in the context of a rally, when Mr. Modi is making all kinds of taunts and he can afford to be a statesman after that, it has not gone in any detail at all about our forces fighting. They have made a passing comment about management by the government. But I must say that as a country, as an opposition, while standing united, we have to ask this question. What is it that has happened in these few weeks and months? How has this consensus suddenly vanished? How has this emboldenment